Another myth that I want to address is that creativity. I lost my train of thought. Hey guys, Antavia here, and today I'm coming to you with a very short video about 3 common myths on creativity. So, for the last 2 years, I have been avidly saying how I believe every person has a measure of creativity. No matter how small or how large it is, I believe in some extent, in a lot of ways, human beings are just naturally creative people. But like anything, creativity takes practice and intentionality. So in my experience as a youth worker, I used to work in youth ministries. My minor is in youth ministry, so I've worked with kids and teenagers in various levels of academics, education, creativity. And as a poet and as a writer, I've come across teenagers and adults alike who constantly would say, once they figured out what I do, oh, I'm not creative. Or I used to be creative when I was little, but then I kind of grew out of it. And my favorite one is, I used to write poetry a long time ago, but then I stopped. One thing all of these people say is, I'm not creative, as if creativity means you have to be some type of person in order to be creative, and that's just simply not the truth. So the first myth in concerns to creativity is, I'm just not creative. However, the definition of creativity according to Google is the use of imagination or the creation of original ideas, especially in terms of artistic creation, artistic ability. However, I want to focus on the use of imagination and original ideas portion because that applies to all people. Creativity isn't exclusive to painters, poets, and dancers, but creativity is accessible to all people. And any time a person has to think of a new idea or do something in a way that is different than how it's been done before is creativity. If you work in a business, any type of business, anytime you have to develop a model or a plan or create a new program, that involves creativity. As a grant writer, we would often have to sit down and discuss how to write a grant differently than the way it was written a year before. And even though grant writing is very technical, it's very many times statistically, I don't even know if that's a word, but it's based off of statistics of previous numbers, financial records, how many students that you have, and how many, well, in my case, I worked with organizations that work with kids, so how many students do you have that go into this program, and what does this program do, and how does it benefit that student? And many times you have to draft a paragraph, a story that centers around this program, and that requires creativity, even though it is a job that one wouldn't describe as typically creative. So in my version of debunking the I'm just not creative myth is simply learning to look at creativity outside of the lens of poetry or dance or painting or even anything that a person typically deems as creative, because creativity isn't just set aside for artists, but it's something that we all do. Myth number 2 is, I lost my creativity when I got older. So a lot of people I have met who are adults usually say, well, it's like going back to the I'm just not creative, or it's I used to be creative, but when I got older, it kind of just went away. And there is truth to that, in the sense that oftentimes as adults, we feel that we aren't created to be, like our creativity is somehow lessened as we've gotten older, that after we hit later adolescence and our late teenage years, after college, when we get real jobs, creativity isn't something that's needed, which is so far from the truth. Becoming an adult doesn't mean that we age out of creativity, and it doesn't mean that our creative ability disappears. I do believe that as we get older, it's especially if your job and your main thing that you attribute to society doesn't feel creative, it's something that we have to develop and go out of our way to kind of gather and cultivate and rebuild back up, which is why it's really cool when adults, I say adults like I'm not an adult, but when adults have like wine and sips, or paint and sips is what they're called, when they have paint and sips, or there are things that like arcade restaurants and type of things like that that are built for adults, it's seen as this thing that when a person gets older, the things that we enjoyed as children and the type of activities we enjoy as children is something adults aren't supposed to partake in, which is why you have things like adult coloring books, because by the time a person reaches a certain age, they stop coloring, they stop drawing, they stop inviting these creative outlets into their lives. And so, to debunk the I lost my creativity when I got older, is that we don't lose it. Sometimes it gets buried beneath all the things that we do. It gets buried beneath bills and responsibilities, and sometimes family like troubles, or just the development of a family when people have children. And sometimes the time that you once have that you could allot to this, it gets taken up in the beautiful responsibility of building a family. And it doesn't mean that it can't be, what is the word? It doesn't mean that it can't be recaptured, and it doesn't mean that it can't be cultivated again to be something beautiful. Creativity exists in all realms of our lives. It exists in being single, it exists in having a family, it exists when your kids go off to college. It doesn't ever go away. We just have to continue to develop routines and develop practical ways to have creativity in our life, which, if you are looking for ways to have creativity back in your life, you can check out my last video on 4 ways to be more creative this season. So the last and third myth on creativity that I want to debunk is that creativity doesn't require hard work. Success is 10% talent and 90% hard work. And I think when it comes to creativity, you can kind of glean wisdom from that quote, because a lot of times people who are considered creative, people who don't consider themselves creative, think that creative genius is somehow just a spark of inspiration and that people are just kind of on all the time, and that is simply not the truth. Because as someone who writes poetry, who dances, who writes fiction and stories, most of the time it's not just random inspirational moments. Sometimes it is, oftentimes it's not. Creativity requires discipline, it requires planning, it requires being intentional with what it is that you are creating. No creative person 100% of the time wakes up and has good days every single day. It just doesn't work like that. And by good days, I want to clarify and mean the days where you kind of wake up and everything creatively just goes swimmingly well. There are some days where it's harder for me to write. There are some days where movement feels very foreign to my body and I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. There are days where I cannot write a good poem, but that doesn't mean that what I'm doing is somehow invaluable or invalid. It just takes discipline. It takes showing up every day and choosing to be creative even if I don't feel like it. So if you are someone who has been hesitant about being more creative, I hope this video kind of has given you some insight into what you've held to be true about being more creative. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, as well as hit the notification bell so that you get notified when there are more videos like this one. Stay creative.